We often talk about true crime, the forensic evidence left behind, the bloody fingerprints, the timeline, the witnesses.
Hmm.
But what happens when the real crime scene isn't a physical place at all? What if it's the labyrinthine inner world of the perpetrator?
That's a great question.
What happens when a mind decides that, traditional morality is irrelevant, only to discover that the human spirit has its own kind of immutable, self-destructing moral physics?
That is precisely where we are plunging today. We are stepping far beyond police reports and entering the suffocating dark psychology of Rodion Raskolnikov from Dostoevsky's monumental work, Crime and Punishment.
And you've shared with us a rich stack of sources, excerpts, analyses that just completely skip the linear plot and go straight to that psychological core.
Right to the heart of it.
So our mission today is, well, it's like an intellectual autopsy. We're analyzing Raskolnikov's self-inflicted torment. We're going to focus on 3 stages of his mental collapse because the physical act of murder, that was really just the opening bell.
It was just the start.
First, we have to dissect the cold, calculating philosophical justification he developed. Then we'll track the immediate, the debilitating physical manifestation of his guilt and paranoia.
And finally, we'll explore the true, shattering nature of his punishment, a torment that had nothing to do with Siberia and everything to do with his own shattered mind.
So to really understand the crime, we have to start with his initial state, right? Where is he mentally before any of this happens?
Absolutely. Dostoevsky doesn't give us a criminal who acts out of a sudden passion. He presents a man who is already at the breaking point.
He's hopelessly in debt to his landlady.
Hopelessly. And he's living in a room that is more like a cupboard than a room. The environment isn't just poor, it's claustrophobic. It's a perfect reflection of his own mental confinement.
Yeah, and he carries himself with this accumulated bitterness and contempt. He looks at the world, and honestly, often himself, with just this intense disgust.
It's a psychological pressure cooker.
Totally. And he's already mentally frayed before his grand theory even takes physical form.
And you see it in these small, telling details, these little moments that reveal his raw, nervous state. He's walking down the street, completely lost in his own thoughts, and some drunken man shouts at him, "Hey there, German hatter!"
Right.
And he's instantly seized with this terror. He clutches his completely worn-out, rusty hat.
And the text makes it so clear that this reaction isn't just, simple shame about how he looks.
Not at all.
Dostoevsky writes, "Not shame, however, but quite another feeling akin to terror had overtaken him."
That phrase, a feeling akin to terror, that's the absolute key. The shame of his rags and his debts, that's the volatile environment, sure.
But the terror.
The terror is the pre-existing condition of his soul. He is pathologically suspicious, highly sensitized. He already believes the world is tracking him, or mocking him, or conspiring against this grand idea he's nursing inside.
So he's perpetually on the verge of some kind of explosion.
Exactly. A physical and mental explosion. The murder is simply the fuse he chooses to light.
Okay, so let's unpack that core psychological driver. The engine of this whole tragedy is what we're calling the Napoleon Complex. This idea that he's a kind of proto-sigma, a lone wolf so far outside the common herd that he's exempt from their laws.
This is where we get into the heart of his intellectual vanity. Raskolnikov commits a murder not for profit, not out of rage, but to test a theory.
And this theory, which he laid out in an article he'd written, it posits that humanity is neatly divided into 2 rigid categories.
On one hand, you have the first category, the inferior, ordinary. Their only function is to maintain the status quo, to reproduce, to obey, to exist.
They're essentially, in his view, material, cannon fodder for progress, or, as he calls them, lice.
Exactly. And then you have the few, the extraordinary men. These are the individuals who have the gift or the talent to utter a new word.
The innovators, the world shapers.
The historical movers. And for Raskolnikov, uttering a new word requires sweeping away the old.
And this is the terrifying logic he builds for himself, isn't it? He argues that this extraordinary man has an inner right to decide in his own conscience to overstep certain obstacles. Specifically, if those transgressions are essential for the practical fulfillment of his idea. It's this huge intellectual leap from just being an innovator to having total moral immunity.
It is the ultimate form of rational egoism applied to history. He frames transgression not as a personal choice, but as a historical duty.
And to justify it, he names the titans of history, like Kyrgyz, Solon, Muhammad, and especially Napoleon.
Above all, Napoleon. He insists that every single one of them was, without exception, a criminal, because they shattered old laws and traditions to establish their new order.
The power of his argument really rests on that historical precedent. He's basically saying, look, history only remembers the winners, and the winners are defined by how many moral compromises they were willing to make.
And he doesn't shy away from where that idea leads. He poses that famous, really disturbing thought experiment, the one about world-changing scientific discoveries.
Oh, right, the Kepler and Newton example.
Yes, if the breakthroughs of a Kepler or a Newton required sacrificing the lives of 1, a dozen, 100, or more men, then the great man would indeed have been in duty bound to eliminate the dozen or the 100 men.
That word, eliminate, it's so cold. It just strips human life of any intrinsic worth and reduces people to a statistic, an obstruction.
It's a supremely amoral calculation. But the genius of Dostoevsky is showing us that this high-flown theory wasn't really built for humanity's benefit. It was a weapon for his own internal conflict.
So the crime is fundamentally an ego test.
That's it. Raskolnikov is deeply, deeply insecure, despite his intellectual arrogance. His theory becomes a tool for self-affirmation, a desperate attempt to prove he belongs in that elite category.
And he admits this, doesn't he? Later, in that agonizing confession to Sonia, he just lays the true motive bare.
He does. He says, it was not so much the money I wanted, but something else. I wanted to find out then and quickly whether I was a louse like everybody else or a man.
Whether I can step over barriers or not. Whether I have the right.
Notice that obsessive focus on the right. His hunger, his poverty, those are all real, but they're distractions from the core motive. The foundational driver is the validation of his own exceptionalism.
He needs to prove he's one of the men who are not of flesh but of bronze.
The Superman, unbound by the pathetic little rules that govern the masses.
But wait a minute. If the theory is all about asserting the right of this extraordinary man, doesn't his choice of victim just immediately undermine the entire structure?
Yeah.
His act is supposed to be for some grand purpose, but he chooses a petty, despised pawnbroker.
And this is the ultimate tragic irony. Dostoevsky deploys it masterfully. The grand intellectual justification just crashes head-on into the pitiful, banal reality of the deed.
He tries to connect his abstract ideal, Napoleon, the pyramids, Waterloo, with the specific, grubby reality of a wretched, skinny old woman, a pawnbroker with a red trunk under her bed.
It's a ridiculous equation. The juxtaposition is so jarring that Raskolnikov himself is immediately disgusted by it.
He even thinks to himself that it's a nice hash for Porfiry Petrovich to digest. How can they digest it? It's too inartistic.
Too inartistic. The failure is aesthetic and philosophical before it's even moral. The grand Napoleonic crime disintegrates into something shameful, messy, and just profoundly trivial the moment the axe lands.
So the very thing he was looking for, self-affirmation as an extraordinary man, is immediately choked by the loathsome reality of what he's done.
He doesn't feel moral guilt, not in that moment. He feels the agonizing contempt of a theorist who has completely failed his own experiment.
And that failure, the shattering of his whole intellectual framework, that's where the real punishment begins.
Yes. The theory promised him immunity, but what he gets instead is immediate, devastating psychological and physical decay.
Dostoevsky makes it so clear. The body and the mind, they refuse to be dictated to by some abstract theory of rational egoism.
The moment the violence is done, Raskolnikov's guilt, or what passes for guilt, manifests not as a conscious pang of moral regret, but as an overwhelming, acute physical collapse.
He describes it in such excruciating detail. He's immediately seized by an unbearable, icy shivering, then darkness before his eyes, and he spends days just shaking with fever.
This isn't just a nervous breakdown, it is psychosomatic self-destruction. The moral violation is channeled directly into this debilitating physical sickness.
And this leads to that period of complete mental fragmentation, the loss of control where his consciousness just fractures.
During his illness, he is sometimes delirious, sometimes half-conscious, but the most fascinating psychological insight here is what he raves about.
Right, he's repressing the core existential horror, the memory of the murder itself, the axe, the blood.
All of that is blocked, but his mind broadcasts all the surrounding trivial, insignificant details.
We see him raving about a bulldog and about earrings and chains and about Krestovsky Island and some porter.
He even whines, "Give me my sock!"
The traumatic center is successfully blocked by the mind's defenses. But the insignificant periphery, all the noise, the objects, the mundane movements that surrounded the act, it all comes pouring out in this torrent of babble. This is where Dostoevsky just perfectly shows us the weakness of the intellectual man. The man who prided himself on absolute rational control loses control over the most trivial details of his life.
His fragmented mind avoids the weight of the existential horror by obsessing over external minutiae. He can't face the crime, so he fixates on the clutter around the crime.
And this sense of profound mental fragmentation, it isn't just confined to his little room.
No. Once the fever breaks a little, the guilt compels him toward this involuntary participation in his own torture. We see that powerful compulsion to revisit the scene of the crime.
And it's not to check for evidence, is it?
Not at all. It's purely for psychological reliving. He starts walking toward the police station, maybe to confess, but he's drawn by an overwhelming, unaccountable prompting back to the house where he did it.
He can't stay away from the psychological gravity well he created for himself.
And when he gets there, he finds the flat that belonged to the old woman is being done up. They're redecorating. They're replacing the old yellow paper with new white paper covered in lilac flowers.
And his reaction to that is so telling. He looks at this new wallpaper with horrible annoyance and just intense dislike.
The world is moving on. It's renovating the physical space of his great, unique, theoretical crime. And to his ego, the lilac flowers, they represent the erasure of his agony. And that is a fresh source of excruciating torture.
The great deed has to be remembered, even if only by the perpetrator's suffering.
But that internal agony is quickly amplified by the external reality, the brilliant, subtle torture applied by the investigator, Porfiry Petrovich.
This is not your conventional detective story.
Not even close. This is the ultimate cat-and-mouse game, and it's played entirely inside Raskolnikov's head.
Porfiry is a master of psychological manipulation. He's not interested in fingerprints. He's obsessed with the psychology of the modern criminal, especially the self-styled superior man.
He knows Raskolnikov is nervously irritable by temperament, and he uses that instability against him at every turn.
His whole strategy seems designed to make Raskolnikov defeat himself.
It is. Porfiry starts his assault by revealing he knows about Raskolnikov's published article, the one about the extraordinary men.
That is just a brutal opening move. By casually bringing up the very theoretical foundation Raskolnikov used to justify the murder, Porfiry is basically saying, I know exactly why you did this, and your theory isn't unique, and it doesn't make you immune.
He attacks the very root of Raskolnikov's identity, his intellectual superiority.
And he just maintains this constant low-level pressure. Then he escalates with deliberate misinformation. He tells Raskolnikov the story of the painter, Nikolai, who supposedly confessed to the crime.
This is a genius move of psychological warfare.
It's incredible. Porfiry tells him that Nikolai's confession, including an elaborate alibi about laughing on the stairs, was a stroke of genius designed to disarm suspicion.
It's pure intentional provocation. Because Raskolnikov, the real murderer, knows Nikolai is innocent.
And the idea that the police in history might settle for such an inartistic solution, an ordinary accidental criminal that threatens to reduce his great Napoleonic act to just some unsolved street crime.
His intellectual pride cannot bear it. Porfiry is forcing Raskolnikov to react against the perceived trivialization of his superior crime.
Porfiry's deduction is so masterful because it targets Raskolnikov's ego, not the facts of the case. He sees his inner conflict perfectly.
He says it. He is a murderer, but looks upon himself as an honest man, despises others, poses as injured innocence. No, that's not the work of a Nikolai, my dear Rodion Romanovich.
He knows Raskolnikov is too proud, too intellectual to be some accidental criminal who would let an innocent man take the fall for his work.
He is banking on Raskolnikov's desperate need for intellectual recognition of his own exceptional wickedness.
And Raskolnikov's paranoia during these interrogations is just off the charts, but it's completely justified. He feels they're tracking him like a pack of dogs.
And we, the reader, we realize how justified that is when we find out about the unseen man. Porfiry had actually locked a witness, a porter, who had been vexed by Raskolnikov's earlier visit, in the next room during the interrogation.
Wow. So the man was there, ready to confirm Raskolnikov's own bizarre behavior at the scene later that day.
The psychological trap was set, just waiting to spring. Porfiry was indeed playing with him. And this relentless mental pressure pushes Raskolnikov to his breaking point, forcing him to beg internally, "Come, strike me openly. Don't play with me like a cat with a mouse."
The mental agony becomes so much worse than the physical fever ever was.
And this brings us to the ultimate realization Dostoevsky offers. The true punishment. The fever, the paranoia, the cat-and-mouse game, those were just preparatory stages.
Right.
The real sentence Raskolnikov served was self-inflicted. It was a profound, shattering isolation and alienation from all of humanity. A psychological prison built by his own failed philosophy.
The theory of the Superman had promised him sovereignty, mastery. But what it delivered was an inability to connect. He can't even accept human love.
Exactly. When his mother and sister Dunya finally arrive in St. Petersburg, his reaction is aggressively hostile.
He tells them, "Don't torture me." He irritably insists they leave. He is literally repulsed by their genuine affection.
He's so poisoned by his own pride that their connection feels like a physical assault to him.
And yet his internal monologue reveals this huge chasm between his abstract love for them and his present corrupted ability to express it. That truly heartbreaking thought comes up. Yet, in their absence, I seem to love them so much.
The theory hasn't killed his capacity for love, not entirely, but it has completely severed his ability to express it in the moment, trapping him in this shell of self-loathing.
And that alienation, it extends to his complete misunderstanding of his sister, Dunya, her engagement to the repulsive Lejeune.
You can't see her sacrifice for what it is. Dunya is contemplating marrying this awful man out of charity and need for her family, a tremendous act of self-sacrifice.
But Raskolnikov just projects his philosophical sickness onto her noble intentions. He can't fathom genuine self-sacrifice outside of his own grand Napoleonic calculus.
His contemptuous internal thoughts reveal that poisoned perspective. He thinks, proud creature, she won't admit she wants to do it out of charity. Too haughty. Oh, base characters. They even love as though they hate. Oh, how I hate them all.
He's judging her vile action, her self-sacrifice, with the same contempt he held for the pawnbroker. It shows the theory has made him incapable of recognizing purity or goodness.
He hates their love because he hates his own desperate need for it.
But the most profound agony for him is that his suffering is rooted entirely in his philosophical failure, not in moral guilt.
Yes, he is miserable not because he killed a person, but because he killed unsuccessfully. He failed the test.
He feels contemptible because he couldn't become the extraordinary man who could step over barriers and remain cold.
He compares his petty little crime to the grand achievements of history's great lawgivers, who can storm too long, makes a massacre in Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, and gets off with a jest at Vilna.
He couldn't even manage to be indifferent to his paltry crime. He confesses to Sonia the real spiritual torture. If I'd simply killed because I was hungry, I should be happy now.
The fact that his crime was intellectual, a test of his right to power, that is the source of his unending spiritual agony. It's far worse than the desperation of poverty. The theory itself is the curse.
And this is why the contrast with Sonia is so vital. She serves as the true moral compass against his cold rationality.
She embodies the raw human spirit he tried to eliminate. Despite her notorious behavior, her profession, she maintains what the text repeatedly calls the purity of her spirit.
She's described as modestly and poorly dressed, almost like a child. Her humility and her unquestioning faith stand in stark opposition to his intellectual arrogance and nihilism.
She is the living embodiment of the compassion he has rejected.
In one of the most structurally important scenes in the entire novel, Raskolnikov forces her to read from the Bible, the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead.
Yes, this act is pivotal. We need to really unpack this.
Why Lazarus? Why force this faithful yet degraded woman to read this specific passage? He's not doing it to find faith for himself, is he?
No, not at all. He senses that Sonia possesses a secret treasure, her profound, unshakable belief in miracles, in a divine intervention that completely transcends rationality.
And Raskolnikov, the scientific nihilistic rationalist, he's compelled to either destroy that faith or maybe assimilate it.
He sees her belief as irrational, yet deeply powerful. He needs to test if his logic can withstand her raw spirituality. Or perhaps deep down he is seeking a miracle for himself, the resurrection of his own dead spirit.
He wants to see if he can break her.
But Sonia reads the passage with trembling ecstasy. She believes fundamentally that Raskolnikov too is blinded and unbelieving. He too will hear, he too will believe, yes, at once, now.
She sees him as spiritually dead, buried by his sin, and believes that faith, not logic, is the only thing that can raise him, just as Christ raised Lazarus.
And this whole scene, it prepares you and it prepares Raskolnikov for the confession. He's ready for judgment, for horror, for moral condemnation.
But when he finally breaks and tells her what he did, Sonia's immediate reaction is just pure, overwhelming, unearned empathy. Oh, how you are suffering.
She doesn't recoil from the deed. She recognizes the torment consuming the man. It is a radical act of grace that shatters his carefully constructed world of logic.
She immediately offers to share his fate. I will follow you to Siberia.
And that is the first monumental crack in the armor of the Napoleon Complex. His theory promised self-mastery and solitude in his superiority. Her response offers reciprocal suffering and shared life.
Her acceptance is the beginning of his true regeneration.
Ultimately, the path to his delayed redemption requires him to choose between total philosophical apathy and accepting human suffering as necessary.
Even when he decides to confess, he's listless and sullen. He's still locked in his intellectual confusion. He feels he has somewhere else to go, but absolutely nowhere to land.
We see him wandering by the Neva River, considering suicide. He admits, I wanted to end it all there, but I couldn't make up my mind.
The profound, basic drive to live, even in wretchedness, is stronger than his entire theory of the superior man.
He can't even commit to the ultimate act of self-sovereignty suicide because the human spirit just resists its own elimination.
And he still sees suffering as senseless. When he talks to Dunya about the consequences of his confession, he asks, "What's the object of these senseless sufferings? Shall I know any better what they are for when I am crushed by hardships and idiocy?"
He still thinks the suffering is external, a bureaucratic imposition. He doesn't see it as an internal necessity for genuine renewal and reckoning.
And this continues even right after his trial. We're told he doesn't initially accept the moral responsibility for the act.
His crime is still, in his mind, primarily a failure of execution. It was only in that he recognized his criminality, only in the fact that he had been unsuccessful and had confessed it.
The failure to be Napoleon is still the agonizing point, not the immorality of the killing itself. So, if the intellectual failure was the core punishment, what is the final, humiliating realization that completely shatters that Superman theory?
It happens just before his confession, as he runs to Sonia. He stops, and he analyzes his own motive for seeking her out and forcing her to suffer alongside him.
And he realizes he wasn't looking for faith or even necessarily her love.
No. He was looking for something far more primal and human.
He wanted a witness, an audience, a mirror for his agony.
Yes, he admits, I wanted her tears. I wanted to see her terror, to see how her heart ached. I had to have something to cling to, something to delay me, some friendly face to see.
That's the moment the bronze exterior just melts away.
It's the moment the Superman is revealed to be a desperate child in need of validation and connection. His final, devastating admission to himself is, I am a beggarly, contemptible wretch. Contemptible.
And he's contemptible not because of the murder, but because he's weak and desperate and needs other people to validate his existence, even through their terror of him.
That admission, that he needs connection, that he needs human emotion, is the final, painful death of his theory and the start of his true life.
And that psychological death is what makes the promise of renewal so powerful at the end. The severe external punishment sets the stage for the internal transformation.
Right. The novel ends with the hope of the story of the gradual renewal of a man, the story of his gradual regeneration, of his passing from one world into another. He had to be completely isolated and destroyed philosophically before he could be rebuilt by humility and love.
This deep dive has really taken us from the intellectual arrogance of that extraordinary man theory through the physical collapse and the cat and mouse paranoia to the profound, shattering isolation of the self-proclaimed Superman.
Quite a journey.
Raskolnikov tried to transcend morality by sheer force of logic and ego, but his body and his mind, they immediately rebelled. It proves that human nature isn't some mathematical problem to be solved. It's a living, emotional, and fundamentally interdependent process.
Dostoevsky showed us that the moment Raskolnikov attempted to rise above morality, he immediately fell into physical and mental decay. The crime was a philosophical calculation. The punishment was the automatic, inescapable consequence wired into the very structure of the human spirit. Raskolnikov believed the great man could afford to be cold and made of bronze. But the greatest psychological torment he experienced was his final, humiliating realization that he desperately needed human connection. A friendly face, even if only to witness his suffering.
So we'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider long after this deep dive ends. If even the theoretical murderer, the man who rationally planned to divorce himself from all human law, cannot escape the deep, fundamental need for connection and human validation, how indispensable is genuine, raw human emotion, love, empathy, shared suffering to the absolute maintenance of sanity itself? What does it truly mean to be independent if separation from the human community means instant psychological collapse?